Yesterday, I tried to give you a little background of the history of this period and something about concepts of conflict. Today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about several conflicts in Jewish history in this period, different kinds of conflicts. So the first one is one of the most famous, and that is a movement that was led by this man, whose name was Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, who in 1665 was declared himself no less than the Messiah. Now, there's a very complicated background to this messianic movement. First of all, as we said yesterday, this is a time of new technologies, new transportation possibilities, which means better communication. People can send messages much more quickly and much more safely. They'll know that their message gets to where it's going, and they have more possibilities of sending messages with all the trade that's developing. So that means news spreads very fast, and we'll see that in this movement, news was very important. Secondly, in Jewish terms, this is a period of the spread of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. Now, Jewish mysticism has a very old, long history, at least going back to early Talmudic times, around the time of Jesus, the first centuries of the Common Era. But Kabbalah had ups and downs. It's had its golden ages. In the 12th, 13th century, there was lots of development of Kabbalah. The main book of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, was written in the 13th century. So, in the 16th century, we have another golden age of Kabbalah, where Kabbalists gather in Sfat, in the land of Israel, and begin intensive study of Kabbalah, developing new ideas of Kabbalah. There's a man named Rabbi Moshe Cordovero who developed his version of Kabbalah, and Yitzchak Luria, who developed his version of Kabbalah, and both of them are in the 16th century Tzfat. From Tzfat, the Kabbalah made its way to North Africa, to Italy, north to Germany, and then took a right turn into Poland and points east. And this is all happening in the 17th century and the 18th century. So in the mid-17th century, we're beginning to get a spread of Kabbalah through the Ottoman Empire and Europe. And then, of course, we have lots of wars going on in the mid-17th century. The 30 Years' War, I mentioned yesterday. Also, the Ottoman Empire has lots of turmoil. In 1648, the Sultan was assassinated. Then we have Gezerot Tahtat, the Khmelnytsky War in Eastern Europe, and the wars following that. And for Jews, of course, this, as I said to you yesterday, made a tremendous psychological impact. This was compared to the destruction of the temple in Jewish literature. It was paired with the expulsion from Spain as one of the two great persecutions Jews had suffered. And because of the Gezerot, the persecutions, there were a lot of Jews who expected messianic, the age of the Messiah to come. Because, in one version, the Messiah will come when things are very, very bad. Some say they'll come when things are good, some say when it's bad. And so a lot of people said, that's it, it can't get worse than this. We have such troubles. So the Messiah is supposed to come, and there were messianic expectations on the part of Jews, but also on the part of Muslims. There were Sufi mystics who were predicting in the 1660s that the Dajjal, which is the figure who announces the coming of the Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah, that the Dajjal was about to appear. They had all sorts of signs. And there were Christian millenarians, Christians in Western Europe, who were convinced that the 1,000 years were up and that Christ was going to reappear. The second coming was going to happen. So there were messianic expectations in all three monotheistic religions. And then, of course, we have the Marranos, the Conversos, who, as we talked about yesterday, there still is turmoil among the people who were descended from Conversos. There are still a significant number of them trying to find their place in the world. In addition to the refugees from the 30 Years' War, from the Khmelnytsky Wars. So we have lots of Jews running around trying to find a permanent place to settle. And then we have Shabtai's personality, which we'll talk about in a moment. Let's talk about the chronology of this movement. Now, Shabtai Tzvi was born on the perfect date for the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, to be born. He was born August the 1st, 1626, which was a Saturday, and was also the 9th of Av. What's the 9th of Av in Hebrew date? The destruction, it's traditionally the destruction of both temples. It wasn't the date of the destruction of the second temple for sure, and tradition says it was also the first temple. So it is the day of Jewish mourning. When it comes out on Saturday, on Shabbat, Jews won't fast on Shabbat, so then it's pushed off to the next day. So if you're going to be the Messiah, what a great day to be born. Not only Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which marks the day of destruction, which is why we need a Messiah, but Tisha B'Av, that's on Shabbat, so it's not really Tisha B'Av. It's just perfect. So he was born on Tisha B'Av on Shabbat. And that's why his name is Shabtai. Shabtai comes from Shabbat. He's of Shabbat. And he was one of three sons to an affluent merchant family in the city of Izmir, Izmir, on the western coast of Turkey. It was a merchant city, coastal city, port city. The Jewish community of Izmir was relatively new. It had been founded in the late 16th century, like 2 or 3 generations before Shabtai was born. What am I saying? Yeah, 2 or 3 generations, yes. And it was a very mixed Jewish community, by which I mean there were Jews from many different places and different traditions there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Shabtai was somewhat of a strange child and young man. He studied, he was a good student, he had musical talent, especially singing, but he also did weird things. He used to isolate himself. He believed in ritual bathing in the sea from time to time. In other words, mystical tendencies. He gathered around him a small circle of young men who studied together all the time and engaged in mystical practices together. And he did some things that were not very conventional and that the rabbis didn't like. So from 1651 to 1659, he was in one place and he was expelled from that community and went to another place, another from Izmir to Salonika, from Salonika to Istanbul. Why? Because he did things like, when he said the blessing over the Torah, he pronounced the ineffable name of God, the name that Jews are not supposed to say, the four-letter name, what is often in English said as Jehovah or Yahweh. He pronounced the name of God. You don't do that. He also invited rabbis to a wedding. It was actually his third wedding. He was married twice. Both times he didn't consummate the marriage and was quickly divorced. His third marriage was not to a woman. It was to the Torah. Well, the rabbis of Salonika didn't like that, so they asked him to leave. In Istanbul, he appeared on the street one day with a carriage, a baby carriage, and in it was a fish, because he wanted to show that redemption, with a capital R, redemption was near. Like a child, it will develop slowly, and it's going to start under the sign, the astrological sign of Pisces, of the fish. So that's March, right? That's when it's going to start, in the spring. So again, people didn't feel very, especially rabbis, didn't feel very comfortable with somebody who goes around saying redemption is at hand and these funny rituals. Also, he changed one of the blessings. There's a blessing that you say every day, daily liturgy, which is, blessed art thou, God, who matir asurim, who frees the prisoners, who frees those who are imprisoned. Matir asurim. Shabtai asurim. Okay? Shabtai said it a little bit differently. He said, blessed are you, God, who matir isurim. What's the difference between asurim and isurim? An asur is a prisoner, and isur is a prohibition, something you're not allowed to do, an anti-commandment. So when Shabtai said the blessing, he said, matir isurim, meaning God now permits what was forbidden. In other words, redemption is coming. There's going to be a new reality. The Torah no longer applies. There's going to be a new Torah. So everything you thought was forbidden is now going to be permitted. Well, that's heretical. So again, he wasn't a favorite of the rabbis in these cities that he was in. So after being expelled from Izmir to Salonika, Salonika to Istanbul, and then back to Izmir, he was back home, and his two brothers, who were successful merchants, decided to do what many Jewish families do till today when they have a problematic member. What do? They send him to Israel. So they gave him money and they sent him to Palestine. Well, he sailed from Izmir first to Egypt, to Alexandria. He spent some time there. He got to know the head of the Jewish community of Alexandria, Raphael Yosef. And then he made his way to Yaffo, and in 1662 he settled in Jerusalem. He bought a house and he engaged in mystical practices. Now I should point out that Gershom Shalom, who wrote the massive biography of Shabtai Tzvi, asked psychiatrists what they thought of his behavior. And it seems that this is a long-distance diagnosis, but that he could be classified as what we call today bipolar or manic-depressive. There were times when he was very outgoing, he would sing in public and make speeches, and then there were times when he shut himself in his room and didn't want to see anybody. So when he got to Jerusalem, he kept to himself. He used to take long walks in the desert, praying, studying, not making waves, didn't do any weird things. Well, in 1663, the Jews of Jerusalem were faced with a new tax. And they couldn't raise the money for it. So as we learned yesterday, what does the Jewish community do when it needs money?
They send to the other communities.
What?
They send to the other communities.
Exactly. You ask for help from the other communities. So they knew, of course, I mean, Jerusalem was a small town then. They knew that Shabtai Tzvi had been in Egypt. He knew Raphael Yosef. He had money. So they said, Shabtai, you're our man. Go to Alexandria and ask them to help us. So, as later some people said, this I'll say in Hebrew, Halach kishaliach, chazar kemashiach. He went as a shaliach. Shaliach means a messenger, but it's particularly a messenger whose job it is to collect money. And he came back as a Mashiach, as the Messiah. So, from Shaliach to Mashiach. Well, he went to Alexandria, and when he was there, he did talk to Raphael Yosef and did get some money. He also got married for a third or fourth time, depending how you count. This time to a woman who herself was a very interesting figure. She evidently was from somewhere in Ukraine. She also had messianic pretensions. She was a very colorful figure. So he stayed in Alexandria till late 1664, till late fall, early winter of 1664, and then he went to Gaza. Now, what did he find in Gaza? On his way back to Jerusalem, obviously, right? He met this man, Nathan of Gaza, Natan mi'aza. Now, Nathan was born in Jerusalem in 1643, which means that in 1662, when Shabtai Tzvi got there, he was 19 years old. So he must have known Shabtai Tzvi in Jerusalem, because again, it was a very small town, and the Jewish community was really small. Nathan was a genius. He was considered a genius student. And again, there's a good Jewish tradition that the best students get to marry whom? The richest girls. So, he was betrothed to the daughter of a rich Portuguese Jewish merchant named Lisabona, as in Lisbon, yes, who lived in Aza, because he was a merchant and Aza was a port. So he moved to Aza, where he was supported by his father-in-law, and he's in Aza. In Aza, he starts predicting the Messianic age. The Messiah is almost here. And why did he think that? He was taken with, I mentioned before, the Kabbalah of Yitzchak Luria, Lurianic Kabbalah. Like that. Now, according to Lurianic Kabbalah, very quickly, the world was created when the Ein Sof, the infinite, that is God, who is everywhere, God is everywhere, right? In order to create the world, God had to contract and make a little space in which the world could be created. So the Ein Sof contracted itself, and there was a little space, and then poured into the space what we would call divine splendor, divine energy. And this divine energy is what created the world. But, like a laser, you have to channel divine energy. Divine energy is very, very powerful. And it could do destruction as well. So it has to be channeled in vessels. It has to be aimed at the right place, like a laser. Well, the divine splendor was so powerful that it broke the vessels. And when it broke the vessels, it went back to the Ein Sof. But when the vessels broke, they broke into pieces. And these pieces captured sparks from the divine splendor, the divine light. And as these pieces fell down to the bottom of the space, they took with it sparks. So in other words, they were missing, the divine light is missing some sparks. What does this have to do with anything? Our world is a reflection of the true world. The true world, the world of the mystics. Why is there evil in our world? Because the sparks are not in the right place. And until the sparks get back into the right place, things will be, as Shakespeare said, out of joint. Now, what is the classic, ultimate sign of the fact that things are not right in the world? Hint, ethnocentric expressive hostility. Remember from yesterday, ethnocentric expressive hostility? What is the ultimate sign that things are not right? The Jews. Because the Jews are not in the right place. The Jews are in exile, just like these sparks are in exile, so to speak. So the Jewish exile is just a reflection of the divine exile. Okay. What we have to do to fix that is to redeem the sparks. How do we do that? And this is where the Lurianic Kabbalah had its impact. Every religious act that I perform, every mitzvah, every commandment, you know that word mitzvah? Commandment. The Jews are commanded to do. Every mitzvah, I'm not just performing an obligation. Every mitzvah is connected to liberating one of those divine sparks. So every single Jew has a role in liberating the sparks. And everything I do has cosmic significance. I have the power to help liberate those sparks. Now what Nathan said was, the process is almost finished. Almost all the sparks have been liberated. How did he know? That's a different question. There's just a few sparks left. We just need to make the final push. And we're going to liberate all the sparks, and the Messiah will come. Now, this is very significant because it means the Messiah really doesn't have to do anything. The Messiah is just the sign that the process has been completed. Now, as he developed his theory, he did give the Messiah things to do. But the point is that the most important process is what we all do. And then the Messiah comes and says, okay, you did it, you succeeded. Then he developed, well, he's going to have a final battle with the final sparks. He's going to get his hands dirty. Okay. So, Nathan was in Gaza giving out what's called tikkun. Tikkun. Or tikkunim in plural. What is a tikkun? Tikkun is a repair, fixing. Every person needs a tikkun. Every soul needs a tikkun. People would go to Nathan and say, give me a prescription. What's my tikkun? What do I have to do to get right with God? What do I have to do to contribute to the liberation of the sparks? And he was telling every person, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, whatever it might be, prayer, study, asceticism, rituals, whatever it is, he would tell them what they have to do. Well, Shabtai Tzvi, with his new wife, is on his way back to Jerusalem. He passes through Gaza, and he's in one of his moods. He's down. And he hears, now of course they didn't think in terms of psychology, he hears that Nathan is giving people tikkunim for their souls. His soul was suffering. So he went to Nathan and said, tell me what my tikkun is. What do I have to do to get my soul back the way it should be? And Nathan took a look at him and said, and remember, they knew each other. He said, you don't need a tikkun. You are the Mashiach. Well, Shabtai wasn't prepared for that. And he was in one of his low moods. So, for the next month or so, we're talking about the spring of 1665. Nathan tried to convince Shabtai, yes, you are the Mashiach, you're the man. And he took him on a tour of the graves of holy people. He took him to the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives are buried. To try to convince him. Finally, on the holiday of Shavuot, which was May the 20th, 1665, there's three main holidays: Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot. 50 days after Pesach comes Shavuot, which celebrates the giving of the Torah. In English, you call it Pentecost. And there's a Christian equivalent from Easter to Pentecost, from Passover to Shavuot. Well, Nathan decided he couldn't wait anymore. This is the holiday of the giving of the Torah. This is the time for the Messiah to appear. So, at the morning prayers on Shavuot morning, he announces ceremoniously, Shabtai Tzvi is the Mashiach. One problem. Shabtai Tzvi wouldn't come out of his room. No Mashiach. It took another 10 days. Finally, Shabtai Tzvi got over his depression, and morning prayers on the 31st of May, he appeared in all his glory. And he said, yes, I am the Mashiach. And he had all sorts of ways of proving it. I'll just give you a couple examples. first word in the Torah? Breshit. In the beginning, right? Breshit. Well, guess what? Breshit is just an anagram of what?
Shabtai.
Shabtai. In other words, if you just knew how to read the Torah, you would know who the Messiah was going to be. The first word of the Torah tells us. It's obvious, isn't it? And he had all sorts of proofs like that. You know what gematria is? Numerology. You know, all the Hebrew letters have numerical values. So he was quoting verse after verse. If you figure the numerical value of the verse, it comes out. What does it come out? Shabtai. All these verses talking about redemption are talking about Shabtai, if you just know how to read them. And we don't have time to get into it more, but so that's it. I am the Mashiach. Nathan is just saying what's true. And so, once he declared himself the Mashiach, he went to Jerusalem. What better place for the Mashiach? And the rabbis of Jerusalem weren't too happy about this. So he didn't stay long. However, a rumor developed. It has never been substantiated that it happened, but the fact that people believed that it happened was good enough. The rumor was that he was denounced to the Ottoman authorities because Messiah, that's somebody who's rebelling against the authority of the Ottomans. I mean, Jesus was also accused of rebelling against Roman authority. You can't have Messiah and an emperor or a sultan. So the rumor was he was arrested, but the Qadi, the Muslim judge of Jerusalem, instead of killing him, or at least imprisoning him, what did he do? He let him wear green, which only Muslims were allowed to do. He let him ride on a horse, which Jews were not allowed to do, around the walls of Jerusalem. Well, if the Qadi, if the Muslim, if the Goy says that this guy is something, what are we? There must be something to it. But he was, he felt hostility from the rabbis of Jerusalem, at least many of the rabbis of Jerusalem, and he decided he's going to make the grand tour. He's turned north. He went through what is today Lebanon, Syria, and wherever he went, people hailed, yes, the Messiah has come. He's the Messiah. Did you ever see The Life of Brian? The movie, The Life of Brian? Look, it's an old movie, just like me, but it's worth seeing. You got to see it. The Life of Brian. Okay, he's the Messiah. He goes through these places and people are cheering, coming out on the streets. The Messiah has come, the Messiah has come. Then he takes a left turn, he goes through Turkey, he goes back to Izmir, and once again, he stays in his room. Okay. But while he stayed in his room, Nathan was very busy. Nathan was writing letters to everybody in the Jewish world, from Tehran to Amsterdam, from North Africa to Vilnius, writing to everybody, the Messiah is here, the Messiah is here, the Messiah is here. So the Messiah might have been sitting in his room, but there was tremendous excitement in the Jewish world. How many people decided that he's the Messiah? What's the percentage? I don't know. Was it 5%? Was it 10%? Was it 50%? Nobody can answer that question. All we can say is it was significant. A significant number of people really believed it was the Messiah. And probably more people said, well, maybe it's the Messiah, let's see. So, from the summer of 1665 until September of 1666, the Jewish world is in uproar. First of all, people are reporting miracles. Things that are supposed to happen when the Messiah comes. For example, in some places they said, all the churches have sunk into the ground. Where do you think they said that? In North Africa, in the Muslim countries. Not in the European countries. Or they said that the red heifer, a very important part of the ritual in the temple was to sacrifice a purely red young cow and use the ashes to purify. So the rumor is, we found the red heifer. We're going to be able to purify, because everybody is ritually impure these days for various reasons. So in order for the temple to be rebuilt, which the Messiah will do, we have to become ritually pure. In order to do that, we need a red heifer. Well, guess what? We have it. They found it. So we have all these rumors that things are happening. And then Shabtai himself instituted what we might call reforms in Judaism, not to be confused with the 19th century reform movement. What do I mean by reforms? Well, first of all, he changed the prayers. Like what we said before, Matir Isurim instead of Matir Asurim. Jewish communities from Amsterdam to Tehran, some Jewish communities began praying not for the government or the Sultan or whoever they governed them, but praying for Shabtai Tzvi. Or they're saying a psalm that talks about the restoration of David's kingdom and making that part of the daily liturgy, because that's what's going to happen now. So there are people who really believe this and do something about it. Also, repentance. People start repenting because they want to be sure that they're on the ship. So, for example, in Amsterdam, there was a Jewish theater, there were Jewish coffee houses. They closed. Okay, no more of this hanky-panky. We're going to be on the straight and narrow now because Messiah is here. We got to be part of the people who are going to be saved. And preparations. People actually packed, ready to go. A group of Jews in Amsterdam hired a ship. Jews in Persia said to their governor, we're leaving within 3 months, so we're only going to pay taxes for the next 3 months, not for the whole, whatever period it's supposed to be, because we won't be here. And pilgrimages to Shabtai Tzvi, where he was, and we'll get in a moment to where he was. So here are two examples of reactions to the news. One, you remember Glickel, we spoke about yesterday. So, in 1665, Glickel was 19 years old. She was already married, had 2 or 3 children already. And she writes about we heard the news. My father-in-law packed. Her father-in-law was in Hamlin, right? She was in Hamburg. He packed 2 barrels full of provisions that he would need when he got to the land of Israel. He sent them to Hamburg to his son and daughter-in-law to keep there so it would be ready when he got the word, he'd get on the ship and his barrels would be there with everything he needed. She said we kept it for a couple of years, and then finally things began to smell, and we had to throw it away. But she says, and she's writing, of course, long after Shabtai Tzvi is no longer the Messiah, there was something to it. There was something to it. And the reason why it didn't succeed, she doesn't say Shabtai Tzvi was a fake. She says, it was us. We weren't worthy. We didn't repent enough. The reason why it didn't work out was nothing wrong with Shabtai Tzvi, it was us. So I think that's probably a very typical reaction. That is, she wasn't a fanatic supporter of Shabtai Tzvi. She didn't go out on the street. But she was waiting, maybe this is it, maybe this is it. And she was convinced that if it wasn't it, it's not because Shabtai Tzvi was a counterfeit. Or another example is two prominent young Polish rabbis. They were the sons, and one was the son, one was the stepson of a very important Polish rabbi. They were sent by the Council of Four Lands, the Va'ad Arba Aratzot. There was a council for all of Polish Jewry that was over all the communities, called the Council of Four Lands, Va'ad Arba Aratzot. And their father, or stepfather, was a member of the council. They were sent as an official delegation to Shabtai Tzvi to see what's going on here. Is it real? So, at the time, Shabtai Tzvi was in Gallipoli, as we'll see in a moment. And they got there. So first of all, they were made to wait. You don't just go into the Messiah. They waited for, I forget now how many days it was, but something like a week or so. They had to wait. Finally, they get their audience. And when they get into Shabtai Tzvi, they say, look, our people are suffering back in, I don't know what I'm supposed to call it. They would have called it Poland, okay? You know what happened to us 20 years ago. And he says, do I know what happened to you? Why do you think I'm dressed in red? And why is my Sefer Torah draped in red? Because the day of vengeance is in my heart. And the year of redemption is nigh. He told them what they wanted to hear, of course. And then what did he do? He sang for them with his beautiful voice. And then he gave them all sorts of gematria, showing that he's the Messiah, the redemption is coming, that the Jews are going to be avenged for what happened in the 1640s and 50s. Everything's going to be great. And they said, wow, terrific, great. We want to stay. We want to stay. We want to be here. He said, no. Don't stay. You have to go back and carry the news. You have to go back to Poland. And they said, no, we want to stay. No. But he didn't let them go empty-handed. He took his sugar cube, one of his sugar cubes, and gave it to one of the rabbis. And the other one said, hey, what about me? Don't I get something? So then he took his scarf and gave it. The holy man giving something of his to the follower. And this is a common motif. He didn't invent it. And it continues. I mean, like Hasidic rabbis who, they have a tish, their Shabbat table, and they hand out shirayim, the leftovers of food that was on their plate. It's the same idea. You get something from the holy man. So they take this, they go back to Poland, and they say, he's here. How many people believe them? I don't know. So that's just an example of what's going on. Now, back to Shabtai. He finally wakes up in December of 1665, around the time of Hanukkah, the holiday of Hanukkah. And he starts making his presence known. So, one Shabbat, he's at the head of a mob, I would call it, of 500 people, according to the source we have, marched to the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Izmir, demanding that a very wealthy Jew by the name of Chaim Pena be handed over to the mob. Why? Because Chaim Pena was preaching against Shabtai Tzvi, was saying he's not the Messiah. So, the elders of the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Izmir locked the doors so the mob couldn't get in. What did they do? On Shabbat, they broke the doors down. Chaim Pena ran for his life. He escaped through the roof. Shabtai Tzvi took over the synagogue and started preaching and saying, the rabbis, these aren't rabbis. You know, the Torah talks about 4 non-kosher animals. Pig, camel, the rabbit, and a different kind of rodent. Okay? He said, you see these 4 rabbis? He's a rabbit, he's a camel, he's a pig. And he went through his act with the singing and the gematrias and I'm the Messiah. A different time, probably on the Shabbat of Hanukkah, in a different synagogue, he appeared with a beautiful robe, with a train, a boy in front of him with a silver bowl full of candy, marched into the synagogue with all his retainers, again, takes it over and leads the service in the way he thinks it should be. And again, an important part of this is announcing everything that was forbidden is now going to be permitted. A new Torah, a new reality. He also is receiving delegations from different places who want to check out the Messiah. And he starts giving out kingdoms to his lieutenants. You're going to be the king of Africa. You're going to be the king of France, etc. Because the Messiah is going to rule. Well, by the end of December, it's time to do something. He gets on a boat from Izmir to go to Istanbul and to get to the palace of the Sultan. And of course, what's going to happen when he gets to the palace? The Sultan's going to get up and say, please. Now, this was supposed to take 3 or 4 days by ship. It took a month because there were storms and other problems. His followers interpreted this as he's fighting the last forces holding the Sparks prisoner. This is the last battle. That's why it's, I mean, the fact that it's taking so long, that itself is a sign that this is something unusual. He gets to the Sultan's palace, and by now the word had been passed that he was on his way, and his opponents denounced him to the authorities. He's a rebel, and as soon as he gets to Istanbul, he's arrested. And he's sent to a place that's famous for something else, Gallipoli. It's famous for World War I. But he was sent to Gallipoli to prison. Ah, what a prison. This is In Hebrew, it was referred to as Migdal Oz, the Tower of Strength. Why? Because they bribed the guards, and basically he used this prison as his palace, where he received all these people like the rabbis from Poland, who were bringing him gifts and money and showering him with attention. So, you know, it's like a South American drug lord in prison. He was having the time of his life. And so that was from April until September. And then on the 5th of September, another Polish Jew showed up. A man by the name of Nehemiah HaKohen. Nehemiah HaKohen, another Polish Jew. And there was a problem here, because Nehemiah thought he was the Messiah. So he has an audience with Shabtai Tzvi, and he says, I don't think you're the Messiah, because you don't fulfill all of the requirements. For example, in Jewish tradition, there's supposed to be two Messiahs. First, Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef, that is the Messiah who comes from the tribes of Joseph, or really Ephraim, the son of Joseph. Mashiach ben Ephraim. And he's supposed to fight all the battles, do the dirty work, and prepare the ground for Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, the son of David, the real Messiah. Something like the Muslim idea, first the Dajjal and then the Mahdi. So first Mashiach ben Yosef and then Mashiach ben David. Where is Mashiach ben Yosef? Where is he? Shabtai Tzvi says, what are you talking about? Mashiach ben Yosef, his name was Abraham. He was a Jew in Ukraine. He was killed during the Khmelnytsky Wars. Then he was Mashiach ben Yosef. Well, Nehemiah really wasn't too happy with that answer or any of his answers. And he, according to the sources we have, 3 days and 3 nights, he persisted in attacking Shabtai Tzvi until he realized that Shabtai Tzvi's boys were losing patience with him. And he feared for his life. So what did he do to save himself? He ran for the gates. And he yelled to the Muslim guards, the Turkish guards, I want to convert. I want to convert to Islam. To save himself from these Jews. Because that's the only thing that could save him is if he was going to be a Muslim. So, well, after that happened, somebody in the Turkish bureaucracy, maybe the Sultan himself, decided, okay, enough of this nonsense. We want the Jews to be working. We don't want them to be preparing for the Messiah. The Jews have to, remember what Menashe ben Israel said. They've got to make money for us. Enough of this. So, they brought Shabtai before the royal council, where you never knew if the Sultan was there or not. The Sultan's place was behind a curtain. Was he behind a curtain or wasn't he behind the curtain? You never knew. Which of course was a very efficient way for him to keep his authority there, because he could be out playing golf and they would think that he's behind the curtain. So, Shabtai is brought before the royal council and they say, you know what? We hear you're the Messiah. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you up against the wall. And we're going to shoot poison darts at you. Now, if you walk away from that wall, you know what? You're probably the Messiah. But if you don't, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Now, they didn't say it quite like that, but you get the idea. Well, Shabtai said, me? Messiah? I'm a teacher. You may know someone else has said that, but I'm just a teacher. They said, oh, is that right? Well, you know what? You can be a teacher and a Muslim too. And Shabtai said, that's a good idea. So he converted to Islam. The Jewish Messiah converted to Islam. I'll say that again. The Jewish Messiah converted to Islam. He was given a title, Kapichi Bashi, which means the head gatekeeper. He didn't keep any gates, but that was just his title. And a monthly stipend. And they sent him to Albania, which the Ottomans ruled then, as you know. And that's where he stayed until he died. And again, he died on the perfect day for the Messiah to die. He died on September 17, 1676 at the age of 50, which just happened to be Yom Kippur. So he was born on Tisha B'Av, and he died on Yom Kippur. Now, if that's not the Messiah, what is? Plus, the Torah says he was the Messiah. Okay, he died. Did his movement die? Not really. Many people who believed in him said, whoa, the Jewish Messiah doesn't convert. But there still were hardcore believers who said, oh, you think he converted? He didn't convert. What's the worst thing a Jew can do? Convert, right? Well, he had to do that to get down in the muck and fight the forces of evil who were holding on to the last sparks. So to show that he is there with the evil, I mean, they're around each other. So the symbol of that is conversion. But wait, you'll see. Once he's finished with that, all will be well. Now, of course, he died. What then? They said, oh, he's coming back. 40 years from his original appearance. Like 40 years in the desert. The Israelites were 40 years in the desert. So 1665 plus 40 gets us to 1705. He'll be back. Okay. Now, just to give you, Shabtai Tzvi comes from Izmir to Alexandria to Jerusalem, Yaffo, then up through Lebanon, Syria, back to Izmir, to Istanbul, and then to Gallipoli, and then he winds up in Albania. Okay, that's where he dies. Okay, now let's get to the conflict. There are multiple contexts for this movement. First of all, political and economic. This is a time of political turmoil. As I mentioned, all the wars going on. The problem of succession in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is suffering economically because this is the beginning of the European powers making incursions into the East, into what they call the Orient. It's beginning now in the 17th century with the new transportation and communication. And the Ottoman cities cannot compete with the cities in the West. So, for example, in Salonika, where they had an important textile industry, it died because they couldn't compete with the textiles of the West. As we said, both Muslims and Christians, there are movements within, not all Christians, all Muslims, but within Christianity and Islam, there are movements predicting the Messiah is coming. And some of them said, when Shabtai Tzvi popped up, oh, this is the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist. In other words, before the real Messiah comes, we have to have the anti-Messiah. So that, of course, is a Jew. Shabtai Tzvi, well, he's not the Messiah, God forbid, but he's the anti-Messiah. And then, as we said yesterday, conflicts never occur in isolation. There is a bunch of local and general Jewish conflicts that Shabtai Tzvi fed into. What do I mean? Let's take Izmir, Shabtai Tzvi's hometown. So, as I said, it's a new Jewish community. It was founded in the late 16th century. Everybody there, Jewishly, is an immigrant. And they come from different places. You have an Ashkenazi Jewish community. You have Portuguese, that is Sephardic Jewish community, made up of people who were conversos who returned to Judaism. There are what's referred to as a Romaniot Jews, that means Greek-speaking Jews, Jews who trace themselves from the Eastern Roman Empire and lived in the Balkans and in what's today Turkey. So you have 6 different Jewish communities in Izmir. 6 different communities, each one has its rabbi. Uh-oh. Will the real rabbi please stand up? Who is the rabbi of the community? So from the beginning, they have 2 chief rabbis. That may remind you of a place today where there are 2 chief rabbis. I won't mention it by name. You know what I'm talking about? 2 chief rabbis. It's not New York. It's not Paris. Israel has 2 chief rabbis. Ashkenazic and Sephardic. Okay? Izmir had 2 chief rabbis. And this tradition continued. At the time of Shabtai Tzvi, there were 2 rabbis, Chaim ben Vinisti and Aharon Lapapa. Now, Chaim ben Vinisti, he was in charge of religious questions. Is my chicken kosher? Am I allowed to do this on Shabbat? Am I really divorced? In Judaism, that's a religious question. Personal status. Aharon Lapapa was in charge of civil cases. Remember I said yesterday, where Jews have autonomy, they have their own courts. So if a Jew is suing another Jew, they go to the Jewish court. And that's what Aharon Lapapa was in charge of, the Jewish civil court. But Chaim ben Vinisti really wanted to be the chief rabbi. He wanted to be in charge of everything. Then we have the paid rabbis versus the unpaid rabbis. There are lots of scholars running around. They're teachers, freelance scholars, let's call them, who don't have a regular salary, or if they're a teacher, it's a lower salary certainly than the rabbi of a community. And there's a certain tension between the rabbis who have a good salary and the rabbis who think they should have a good salary. And then there's the problems. Since there's no Izmir Jewish tradition, all the people came from somewhere else. What should be the custom here? Should we go according to the custom of Istanbul or the custom of Salonika? So, for example, are you familiar with the phrase glatt kosher? Glatt kosher? Glatt kosher, the word glatt comes from Yiddish. It means smooth. So what it means is when you slaughter an animal for food, the shochet, the slaughterer, is supposed to blow up the lungs, inflate the lungs, and run his hand over the lungs. If there is some imperfection in the lungs, it has to be inspected. The basic rule is this: if the animal is diseased, if the animal would have died, if you hadn't slaughtered it, would have died from whatever problem it had, then it's not kosher. So if it has a lung growth or hole, it's not kosher. And there's a whole science of determining what disqualifies, how bad does it have to be for it to be disqualified. Glatt kosher means that when you run your hand over the lung, it's completely smooth. There's no doubt, there's no question. You don't have to ask the rabbi. So, in other words, glatt kosher is super kosher. There was never any doubt about it. Now, this is not just an Ashkenazic thing. In these Ottoman communities, in Istanbul, they insisted on what Ashkenazim would call glatt. In Salonika, they were less strict. They said, no, it doesn't have to be glatt. If there's a problem with the lung, let's look at it and see, is it good or not? What do we do in Izmir? Do we go according to Istanbul or do we go according to Salonika? Or smoking. Now, you know you're not allowed to smoke on Shabbat. But on holidays like Pesach, Passover, or Sukkot, it's tricky. You can't strike a match. That you can't do. But if there is a flame that's already burning, if you have a candle that's burning, you can light your cigarette from the candle. In other words, you can't create fire, but you can transfer fire. You can't create fire, you can transfer fire. Okay. In Istanbul, they said, that's very nice, no smoking on the holidays. In Salonika, they said, okay, you can have your smoke on, as long as you light it from an existing flame. What do we do in Izmir? Can we smoke or not? And there's a whole series of things like this. Well, in addition, we have tensions among the 6 different communities. Taxes. Who pays how much? Rich versus poor. We've got rich people who have good connections and don't pay very much tax. And we have poor people who don't have any connections who pay, relatively speaking, a lot of tax, a big percentage of their income. They're not too happy about this. How come the rich guy is paying, like 5% and I'm paying 25%? So we have all these conflicts going on. And then I already mentioned the Chaim Pina episode in the synagogue. Well, this is obvious what's going on here. The Portuguese synagogue is a synagogue of the rich people. The rich Sephardic merchants. And who's in the mob behind Shabtai Tzvi? The poor people. I mean, there might have been some others as well, but that's the hardcore supporters. And this just illustrates what's going on. That Shabtai Tzvi and his supporters are willing to commit violence to get people to toe the line, which means, let's say you're against Shabtai Tzvi, or let's say you like Glickel and you say, well, maybe it's okay. You're certainly not going to say anything bad about him because A, maybe it is true, and B, they're willing to hurt me if I speak out. And let's say you're a rabbi who doesn't believe in him, but you see the people all around you are repenting. What are you going to say? No, don't repent, he's not the Messiah. Doesn't work that way.
I'm sorry,
yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Glickel, what did she do?
She didn't do anything. She was waiting and seeing what's going to happen.
She approached the Shabtai Tzvi was...
No, she never left Hamburg. She only kept her father-in-law's 2 barrels waiting. She didn't prepare any barrels. She said,
Just was.
we'll see what's going to be. So, in other words, Izmir is an example of we have all these local conflicts. Along comes Shabtai Tzvi and gives form, gives a framework to the conflict. I don't hate you because you're rich. I don't care about your money. I'm against you because you don't recognize the Messiah. In other words, we take an objective conflict and make it subjective. This isn't about money. This isn't about power. This is about truth. You don't accept the truth. So, you see how all these conflicts feed into the Shabtai Tzvi conflict in Izmir, and was like that in many other places. But then there are general pan-Jewish conflicts here. First of all, of course, is Shabtai the Messiah? Has the Messiah come? I mean, that's a big question for the Jews. They pray every day, 3 times a day, send us the Messiah. They've suffered for 1,665 years because they said Jesus wasn't the Messiah. So, is this it? Yes or no? Is redemption at hand? And if it is at hand, can Judaism change? Is it true? Matir Isurim? Is that really true? We can have sex any way we want now? Now also, this conflict over Shabtai Tzvi was used to resolve conflicts. And I'll give you an example. In Hamburg, Hamburg was really three separate Jewish communities. Altona, Wandsbek, and Hamburg. In the beginning, no Jews were allowed to live in Hamburg. So the Jews lived in the suburbs, in Altona and Wandsbek. So the main community was Altona. And then when Jews could live in Hamburg, some Jews moved there. And they wanted to be an autonomous Jewish community. They didn't want to be under Altona. They wanted to be their own boss. Now, the physical sign of a Jewish community is when they build something. And that something is not a synagogue. What tells you we have a Jewish community in this place are 2 institutions. Not a synagogue. Why not a synagogue? Because you can pray anywhere. A Jew can pray anywhere. He doesn't have to be in a synagogue. You can pray in this room. You don't need a synagogue to pray in. But there are 2 things that you do need a dedicated building for, or a dedicated place for. 1, a cemetery. When Jews buy land for a cemetery, that tells you, we have a Jewish community. And the second thing is, anybody want to say?
Mikvah?
The mikvah. The mikvah, the ritual bath. You have to have a ritual bath. No 2 ways about it. So, if you see that there is a cemetery and a ritual bath, a mikvah, you know we have a community. Hamburg, the Jews of Hamburg bought a cemetery. And that was to say, we are separate from Altona. And then for a number of years, there was a fight. Can they use the cemetery or not use the cemetery? Because the Jews of Altona went to the Danish authorities, because in those days Hamburg belonged to Denmark. Schleswig-Holstein, that province belonged to Denmark. We won't get into that. And they persuaded the Danish authorities to lock the Hamburg cemetery, so that the Jews of Hamburg would have to bury their people in Altona, which was a way of saying they are subject to Altona. Well, back and forth, back and forth. 1665, the Messiah is here. What are we arguing about? Pretty soon all the dead people are going to revive anyway. Everyone's going to go to Eretz Yisrael. What is the argument about? Forget it. You want your cemetery, have your cemetery. How much longer are you going to need it? So this is an example of Shabtai Tzvi resolving tension. Also, we have reports in various places of legal compromises. People who have lawsuits say, okay, let's settle. And taking losses. Because again, 6 months from now, who's going to need all this? Will I need money? Will I own anything? The Messiah's here. And people really thought this. Again, ask me how many, I don't know. I don't know how many. And obviously when you read about it in the sources, it's very dramatic. And some scholars are tempted to say, oh, that was it, everybody believed this. I don't think that's true. But it certainly was significant. Okay. Our time is up, so I think we'll leave it with this. This was certainly an important conflict in Jewish life in the mid-17th century, and as you read at Ruderman, it continued. It had an afterlife, because as I already said to you, some people believed that this was just temporary, this was just a facade, that Shabtai Tzvi really would come back as the Messiah, and everything would be great. There were various figures, Ruderman mentions 3 of them, who were somehow connected to Sabbatianism, to belief in Shabtai Tzvi, to the idea that there's going to be a new era, a new Torah. And one of them, Jacob Frank, who actually appeared in Ukraine, he said he is an incarnation of Shabtai Tzvi, and he's the Messiah. And to prove it, he became Muslim, Orthodox, and Catholic at different times. Okay, let's take a break.